There are few names in paleontology that carry the weight of Tyrannosaurus rex. Even if you've never opened the textbook, stepped into a museum, or watched a single dinosaur documentary, chances are you still know that name. It's etched into our very cultural memory. 3 simple syllables that instantly conjure an image of raw, prehistoric power. Ask almost any child what their favorite dinosaur is, and you'll probably get the same answer. And really, who could fault them? This was no mere predator. At over 12 meters or 40 feet from snout to tail and weighing upward of 10 tons, T-Rex was an apex carnivore in the truest sense. A creature built for domination. Its skull was a fortress of bone, lined with colossal serrated teeth that could drive through the armor of a triceratops or shatter the massive bones of an Edmontosaurus. Every feature of its anatomy speaks to one simple truth. This was an animal designed to take down giants. But sheer size and strength aren't the only reasons it towers over the rest of our collective imagination. For decades, T-Rex has been the undisputed star of paleomedia. From Jurassic Park to Walking with Dinosaurs, it has been immortalized again and again, not just as another Mesozoic predator, but as the predator, the benchmark, the standard against which all other theropods are measured. More than just a fossil or symbol of a long-gone age, Tyrannosaurus rex has become an icon of natural history itself. It is the gold standard of predatory dinosaurs, a title it claimed over 66 million years ago, and one it still holds in our minds today. Tyrannosaurus rex may be the face of prehistoric predators, but its fame comes with a hidden cost. It becomes the default image of what a proper theropod should look like. It has warped the way we view tyrannosaurs as a whole. This superstar status creates an easy but misleading narrative that tyrannosaurs were always the colossal, bone-crushing apex predators we picture today. The truth is far more complicated and far more interesting. For most of their evolutionary history, tyrannosaurs weren't the burly tyrant kings they're remembered as. They were slender, long-legged hunters built for speed and pursuit rather than brute force, often eking out a living in ecosystems dominated by much larger predators. And as for T-Rex itself, far from being a typical representative of its lineage, it was an extreme outlier, a highly specialized predator that pushed its anatomy to the limits. Its short, immensely strong skull was reinforced like a natural vice. Its thick, conical teeth weren't for slicing, they were designed to crush through bone. Its entire frame was a fortress, built to subdue multi-ton prey in brutal, close-quarters combat. Compare that to the more lightly built tyrannosaurs that came before it, predators with flatter, blade-like teeth for shearing flesh, and skulls designed for speed and agility rather than raw crushing power. And the contrast couldn't be clearer. In many ways, T-Rex wasn't the gold standard of theropods, it was the exception. That raises a bigger question. When did this dramatic transformation happen? When did tyrannosaurs shift from being sleek, fleet-footed hunters to the massive, bone-breaking juggernauts of the Late Cretaceous? To answer that, we need to go back, way back, into the heart of tyrannosaur evolution. And at the center of this story stands one genus in particular, Daspletosaurus. Before T-Rex ever claimed its throne, Daspletosaurus roamed the late Cretaceous landscapes of North America. It was the first of the truly giant tyrants, the one that pioneered the traits we now associate with T-Rex: powerful jaws, a more robust frame, and the brute strength to dominate its environment. This was the turning point, the ground zero for Tyrannosaur's rise from fast, gracile pursuit predators to the massive, bone-crushing kings of the Mesozoic. To understand just how important Daspletosaurus was in the grand story of Tyrannosaur evolution, we need to rewind and look at where these predators came from. Tyrannosaurs trace their roots back to basal Coelurosaurus, with their earliest members appearing in the Middle Jurassic, around 166 million years ago. Remarkably, these early tyrannosauroids spread quickly across the northern hemisphere. By the late Jurassic, roughly 150 million years ago, they had already produced a variety of genera, from Tyrant in Europe to Guanlong in China and Stochaeosaurus in North America. Yet, despite their success, these proto-tyrants bore little resemblance to the massive tyrant kings of later ages. For one, their bodies were leaner and more lightly built. They still sported three-fingered hands, far from the tiny two-fingered arms we associate with later Tyrannosaurs. And while they were impressive for their time, they didn't dominate the food chain. These early forms were mesopredators, comparable in niche to modern coyotes or jackals, opportunists that likely fed on smaller prey and scavenged when possible. The real apex roles of the Jurassic and early Cretaceous were held by larger, more imposing carnivores, Allosauroids, Megalosaurids, and Spinosaurids. Though these early Tyrannosauroids could grow as large as modern big cats or bears, they lacked the sheer power, robust frames, and crushing jaws that would later define their lineage. This status quo lasted tens of millions of years. But everything changed in the mid-Cretaceous. Roughly 90 million years ago, Earth was rocked by a cataclysmic event, the Cenomanian-Turonian boundary event. Triggered by intense undersea volcanism, this event flooded the atmosphere and oceans with CO2, driving global temperatures upward and wreaking havoc on ecosystems. The fallout was devastating. Many dominant predators, especially the great Allosauroids and Spinosaurids, disappeared altogether. Yet, extinction often clears the way for opportunity. With the old giants gone, vacant top predator niches emerged across the northern hemisphere. Into that vacuum stepped the Tyrannosaurs. And they didn't just fill the role, they reinvented themselves for it. First came size. Once coyote to bear-sized mesopredators, these dinosaurs rapidly scaled up, reaching weights near or over a ton, a size previously achieved by only a handful of theropod lineages. Speed followed. Even before their rise, Tyrannosaurs had been relatively swift, with long legs and lightweight builds that made them excellent pursuit hunters. But now, these traits became supercharged. Their forelimbs shrank further, losing function but also reducing drag and overall body mass, an evolutionary trade-off seen in other pursuit specialists like Abelisaurids. Their hind limbs grew longer and more powerful, with elongated tibiae for greater stride length and muscle attachments that enhanced both speed and agility. Perhaps their most important adaptation was in the foot. Late Cretaceous tyrannosaurs developed an arctometatarsus, a unique arrangement where the middle metatarsal was pinched between its neighbors. This structure, first seen in species like Electrosaurus around 95 to 90 million years ago, distributed impact forces more efficiently, improving stability, endurance, and maneuverability. These changes defined a new, highly specialized branch of Tyrannosaurus, the Eutyrannosaurus. No longer overshadowed by older giant predators, they became the dominant hunters of the Late Cretaceous, thriving as powerful, fleet-footed killers across much of the northern hemisphere. This evolutionary trajectory would set the stage for the rise of the true titans of their lineage. And Daspletosaurus was among the first to take that final, crucial step toward the bone-crushing brutes we think of when we hear the word Tyrannosaur. But this balance of power wouldn't last forever. By the dawn of the Campanian, around 83 million years ago, a new wave of Tyrannosaurs appeared on the scene, one that would upend the old order. These were the Tyrannosaurines. Probably evolving somewhere in Asia, Tyrannosaurines belong to the family Tyrannosauridae, the so-called true Tyrannosaurs, which includes the iconic T-Rex as well as their more lightly built cursorial relatives. Like their cousins, the earliest Tyrannosaurines started out as quick, lightly built hunters. Fossils of basal species, such as Alioramus and Qianshusaurus, tell us these predators were agile and fast-moving pursuit hunters. But then came a turning point. In the early Campanian, falling sea levels opened up new land connections, allowing some of these Asian Tyrannosaurians to migrate into Laramidia, the western half of North America. Once there, they underwent a dramatic evolutionary transformation. What emerged from this was a completely new kind of predator, one that theropod evolution hadn't seen before. Up to this point, most tyrannosaurs were built for speed over raw power, but the derived tyrannosaurines, as these newcomers are called, took a very different path and began evolving toward power-based predation. Their skulls and jaws became their primary weapons, transforming into brutal tools of destruction. Even before this shift, tyrannosaurs were already moving away from the slashing, blade-toothed approach of earlier theropods. Tyrannosaurids in particular reinforced this trend, evolving deeper skulls, expanded muscle attachment sites, and even fusing their nasal bones into strong, arching vaults to withstand the stresses of bone-crushing bites. But these early skulls were still relatively narrow and gracile. The derived Tyrannosaurines changed all of that. They abandoned the need for cursoriality and doubled down on brute strength. Their skulls became short, deep, and massively reinforced. With these adaptations, they became something entirely new. Predators specialized for power-based killing. They likely targeted vital areas like the throat, their reinforced skulls able to absorb the torsional and bending forces of struggling victims as they overpowered them. Of course, this strategy came with trade-offs. These predators were best suited for taking down prey about their own size, or slightly larger. Overpowering something massively bigger than themselves was far more difficult than using slashing attacks, which earlier carnosaurs like the Allosaurids had perfected. But in exchange, these new Tyrannosaurines could do something those older theropods couldn't: crack through the armor of North America's heavily defended dinosaurs. Ankylosaurs and ceratopsians, once relatively safe from most predators, were now on the menu, and soon these new tyrants would make their presence felt. Within just a few million years, by about 81 million years ago, the first of these derived Tyrannosaurines had fully established themselves in Laramidia. They diversified quickly, spreading across the landscape and giving rise to multiple genera, particularly in what is now the American Southwest. The earliest of these was Lithranax, a roughly 1.5-ton predator and the oldest known tyrannosaurid. Lithranax was the first tyrannosaurine to fully exhibit that deep, powerfully built skull that would define the lineage. Alongside it were other robust tyrannosaurines, like Teratophoneus and Dynamotheror, all filling similar roles as heavy-hitting ambush predators. But these early arrivals were still in transition. These early derived tyrannosaurines were only prototypes of what was to come. Their design hinted at the future kings of the Late Cretaceous, but they hadn't yet become the fully optimized, hyper-powerful predators that would one day dominate the continent. It didn't take long for the derived tyrannosaurines to push their adaptations to the limit. While the smaller southwestern forms prowled the southern reaches of Laramidia, a new northern lineage, the Daspletosaurinae, emerged. Its first representative, Thanatothyrestes, shared many traits with its southern cousins, but remained relatively modest in size, at just 1 to 2.5 tons. The second, however, was a true game-changer. This was Daspletosaurus. a predator that took the robust, bone-crushing design of its kin to new extremes, becoming larger, stronger, and more heavily built than any tyrannosaur before it. Appearing in northern Laramidia around 77 million years ago, Daspletosaurus marked a turning point in tyrannosaur evolution. Where earlier forms had balanced speed and power, this predator fully committed to the latter. Its size alone set it apart. Adults averaged around 9 meters or 29.5 feet in length and weighed between 2.8 and 3.7 tons, with some individuals, like the massive Pete 3 specimen from Montana, stretching nearly 11 meters or 36 feet and tipping the scales at over 4 tons. At this scale, Daspletosaurus wasn't just one of the largest tyrannosaurs of its time, it was one of the largest predators on Earth, rivaled only by the colossal tyrants that would follow: Tyrannus, Tarbosaurus, and ultimately, Tyrannosaurus itself. Its legs were thick and heavy, with a femur that outmatched the tibia in size, a trait it shared with the much larger T-Rex. These proportions meant slower top speeds, but immense stability and power, ideal for wrestling massive prey. Even its arctometatarsus had been repurposed for absorbing the punishing torsional forces of a struggling victim. The chest was equally formidable, a wide, barrel-like frame over a meter across, supporting huge muscles that anchored a powerful neck specialized for side-to-side wrenching. This made Daspletosaurus a master of the infamous bite-and-shake feeding style, capable of tearing into even heavily armored prey. And then there was the skull, Daspletosaurus's ultimate weapon. Broad, heavily reinforced, and built to endure incredible stress, it featured vaulted, fused nasals and robust teeth. Studies show its skull could withstand immense bending and twisting forces, outperforming similarly sized tyrannosaurs like Albertosaurus and rivaling even T-Rex in its structural strength. Its bite force, exceeding 16,000 newtons, was more than enough to pulverize bones or pierce the armor of ankylosaurs. So, Daspletosaurus wasn't a pursuit predator, it was an ambush specialist. Stalking from cover, it would strike with overwhelming force, latching onto prey with its massive jaws and using its immense body to hold them down, crushing throats or immobilizing limbs until the struggle stopped. Daspletosaurus lived in northern Laramidia during the warm, lush Judithian age of the Campanian. This landscape was full of open floodplains, swampy conifer forests, and huge mountains, a perfect home for diverse megafauna. Huge herds of ceratopsians, ankylosaurs, and especially hadrosaurs roamed here, giving Daspletosaurus plenty of prey options. Isotopic studies even show it hunted different herbivores depending on location. But Daspletosaurus didn't have the place to itself. Its first rival was other Daspletosaurus. These big theropods fought fiercely, as shown by bite marks on their skulls, and even practiced cannibalism, attacking juveniles. Yet, juveniles lived differently, smaller, faster, and with weaker jaws. They hunted smaller prey, like ornithomimosaurs and oviraptorids, avoiding competition with adults. Around age 5, they grew rapidly and eventually competed with adults for big prey. Fossil bone beds also hint that Daspletosaurus tolerated each other's presence to some degree. The second rival was the massive Dinosaur, a 10-meter, around 33 feet, 8-ton crocodilian, and likely the largest carnivore of its time. It ruled the coastal floodplains and even attacked tyrannosaurs, as seen from bite marks on Appalachiosaurus bones. While habitat differences limited direct competition, Dinosaur was a serious threat near water. In a world where usually one giant tyrannosaur ruled, the Judithian ecosystem was special. It had two. Daspletosaurus's fiercest rival wasn't just any predator, but another tyrannosaur, Gorgosaurus liberatus. Gorgosaurus was a sleek, speed-focused cousin from the Albertosaurian branch of Tyrannosaurs, built for chasing prey with long legs and a lighter frame. Though lighter than Daspletosaurus, it was still huge, around 3 tons, and fast enough to be a deadly rival. So how did these two giant predators coexist without wiping each other out? The answer lies in their bodies and habits. Daspletosaurus was the muscle-bound bruiser with a heavy skull, powerful jaws, and short legs, built for tackling tough, armored prey in dense forests and swamps. Gorgosaurus, by contrast, was the marathon runner of Tyrannosaurs, gracile and fast, hunting nimble hadrosaurs across open floodplains. While both loved hadrosaurs, evidence shows Daspletosaurus also took on armored ceratopsians and ankylosaurs. Their different hunting styles likely reflected different habitats, Gorgosaurus in open plains, Daspletosaurus in thick forests. Think of it like modern lions versus tigers, similar but separated by terrain. This ecological divide and conquer let two massive tyrants rule side by side, each king of their own domain. From around 78 to 74 million years ago, Daspletosaurus dominated Western North America with absolute authority, standing as one of the longest-lasting and most successful genera of large theropod dinosaurs. Over this 4 million-year reign, it evolved through an anagenic series of at least 3 species, each similar in size and build: Daspletosaurus ttorrosus, the oldest and most basal species, Daspletosaurus horneri, the youngest and most advanced, and Daspletosaurus wilsoni, a transitional form bridging the two. Some paleontologists also suggest a potential 4th species, informally known as the Dinosaur Park Daspletosaurus. This evolutionary progression highlights just how well Daspletosaurus refined the traits of derived tyrannosaurians, pushing them to heights previously unseen. But, as with all empires, Daspletosaurus's reign came to an end. By the late Campanian, its presence in the fossil record began to wane, signaling a decline. Like many of its tyrannosaur relatives, Daspletosaurus was headed toward extinction, and by about 74 million years ago, it had vanished entirely. Yet the story of Daspletosaurus doesn't quite finish there. Before disappearing, a branch of its population, or possibly a closer relative, branched off, evolving even further toward the massive size and power typical of the later derived tyrannosaurians. This lineage likely gave rise to 3 notable species. First, Tyrannus magnus, a giant over 4 tons from China. Second, Trabosaurus bata, an even larger 5-ton predator stalking Mongolia's floodplains. And finally, the largest and most famous of them all, Tyrannosaurus rex. These 3 ushered in an era of unprecedented tyrannosaur dominance, where these carnivores became some of the biggest land predators ever known and ruled much of the northern hemisphere for millions of years. However, none of this incredible legacy would have been possible without the pioneering success of the original giant tyrannosaur, Daspletosaurus. Throughout its rise and approximately 4 million years at the top, this formidable predator set the stage as the first true progenitor of the robust, power-focused tyrant lizards we recognize today. Thanks to its evolutionary triumphs, tyrannosaurs completed their transformation from small, lightly built pursuit hunters into the bone-crushing icons of the Mesozoic that have fascinated scientists and the public alike for decades. In light of all this, it's clear that Daspletosaurus deserves its place not just as the terror of Campanian North America, but as the very first of the giant tyrant kings.